Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, TJ Mabarty, and today we are going to be wrapping up some final thoughts on the Divisional Round, specifically with the Buffalo Bills, before we start getting on to the championship weekend games. In the second segment, we're going to be talking about the top 5 people in this championship Sunday pool that's still remaining in the NFL and talk about the top 5 people that have the most to gain from a Super Bowl win this season. Then on the second half of the show, we're going to be getting into some NBA, because last night we had a couple historic scoring performances from 2 of the best big men in the league. And then finally, in the last segment, we are going to be breaking down the breaking news of the Miami Heat trading for Charlotte's guard Terry Rozier. Before we get into the show, please remember to like and follow. And if you have any live comments or questions, please be sure to use the link that is scrolling across the ticker throughout the show to help get your questions the priority they deserve. So without further ado, getting into our first segment here, talking about the Buffalo Bills. Now, this is the last time. I don't typically like to harp on teams that just lost, but before we turn the page on them going forward, I just want to briefly go over, where do the Buffalo Bills go from here? Just as a brief recap on Sunday's matchup between them and the Chiefs, they lost in the divisional round once again, 27-24. They had the ball 1st and 10 on the Kansas City Chiefs 27-yard line with 2 minutes and 42 seconds left. From there, it was a 1-yard rush from James Cook. Josh Allen is under pressure on 2nd down, and he actually has an open receiver in Khalil Shakir in the back of the end zone, but because he's getting hit from the left side as he throws, he sort of short arms it. And then on 3rd down, the Chiefs brought the pressure, forced Josh Allen to throw the ball away, and because of that, now a 4th and 9, I think it would have been a different conversation if they had picked up some yardage, whether or not you go for it on 4th down, but on 4th and 9, they pretty much have no choice but to kick the field goal. Ultimately, Tyler Bass, their kicker, misses the 44-yard field goal, and the Chiefs are just able to run the ball out. So now, just starting to at least look ahead a little bit on what is next for the Bills. They have 4 upcoming free agents that played at least 50% of the snaps this season. That is Gabriel Davis, their receiver, who has been a captain for them. He played in all 17 regular season games for the Bills. He's been a nice second option to work off of their star receiver, Stephon Diggs, but he missed the 2 postseason games with a knee injury. I believe it was a PCL strain or something along those lines. So he's unavailable for those games, and his absence definitely seemed like it hurt them. We'll get into a little bit more of the specifics on that. But it is him, Micah Hyde, Leonard Floyd, and Tyrell Dodson. Briefly on Gabe Davis here, he has scored at least 6 touchdowns in all 4 of his seasons with the Buffalo Bills. He was a draft pick 4 years ago, and he has posted 6 touchdowns in 1 year and 7 in all the rest. So he has been an impact player from him. They picked him up in the 3rd round a few years ago. So the Bills have a good history, I'd say. They're definitely not a bad drafting team, but haven't had a ton of stars develop from the draft themselves other than Josh Allen himself. So Gabe Davis has been a big piece of this team in the past few years for the Bills. He said he's open to returning to Buffalo, but he does plan on testing free agency. There was an interesting clip that emerged after their loss where he was sort of going at it with some Bills fans. Obviously a very emotionally charged situation there following that loss, but just a little bit of an interesting situation going on there. And as far as the Bills looking to re-sign him, now they have a very expensive payroll going forward. According to Pro Football Focus, they are 29th in salary cap entering this offseason. And some of the cause of that is the fact that Josh Allen has just completed his 5th season with the team, which means he is no longer on his rookie contract. His cap number will jump from $18.6 million to $47.1 next year. So we've sort of seen this in the past recently with the Chiefs of they're going to have to cut some salary on certain places, and it's not going to be quite as easy to construct the roster now that your quarterback, which of course you had to pay the money that you did, he is now going to be more expensive himself. How do you get around that? Sort of like I alluded to, a lot of the time it is the draft is the way to sort of work your way around, get some cheap, valuable contracts on the books. So they need to start hitting on some of these draft picks. And again, it's not that they have been bad necessarily in the draft. They have a handful of impact players, but just 2 all-pro first-team draft picks within the past 10 seasons. That is Matt Milano and Tre'Davious White, who they took in 2017. They got both of them. Now, they were missing both of them for a lot of this season due to injuries, so they weren't able to be on the field in the most crucial moments of the season, which definitely hurt them. It was part of the reason why their defense struggled so much against the Chiefs this past week. They'll be getting them back next year, of course, but you're just going to need to see whether it's the drafting itself or whether it is the development of these players. They're going to need to sort of pick it up a notch between drafting and development. Similarly to the Kansas City Chiefs, I think that where it really becomes interesting is how much do you pay your weapons for your quarterback, and how much do you pay for them, and are you willing to invest in the top end talent there? Now, if you look at the Chiefs, obviously they made the blockbuster move to trade Tyreek Hill to the Dolphins, knowing that he was going to get a very large contract, and that with Patrick Mahomes' contract kicking in, they weren't going to be able to pay him. They were also already paying Travis Kelce a very large number himself, so they decided to part ways with Tyreek Hill and sort of see if, when you have your franchise quarterback, you would think that a lot of the time he will be able to raise the play of everybody around him. And I know that there's been a lot of conversation about the Chiefs receivers this season, but as we saw last season, it was still a fairly similar situation. Now, Travis Kelce was a lot healthier last year, and he was extremely effective. Now, he's been good for these past 2 weeks there were a couple drops in the Miami game, but very, very cold weather for that wild card matchup. So he is sort of starting to reemerge. They drafted Rashee Rice out of SMU in one of the, I believe he was a day 2 pick, maybe the 3rd round, maybe the 2nd round, but he's been really good for them. He's come along during the course of the season. And yes, they've dealt with a lot of drops, but that is sort of the price you have to pay when you are paying your quarterback so much money. You need to cut back in certain areas. And given that quarterback is such a valuable position, you would think that he is able to make it work with, at times, cheaper options around him. Now, this sort of leads me into a conversation about Stephon Diggs. As we know, Stephon Diggs, an incredibly talented wide receiver. He has been for the past few years, but there is a little bit of a conversation about him not being super effective in the playoffs when they need him the most. Now, you can blame that on a couple different things. Last year, I think it stemmed way further than just himself. I thought that the offense was very much too reliant on the explosive plays. And now, while that was somewhat the case this year, I thought that they were better. I thought that they had more of a run game. So he wasn't quite as necessary sort of in those circumstances. But at the same time, it's kind of hard when you look at the second half of the season, and he was pretty ineffective. He is owed $18 million, $19 million, and $15 million over the course of the next 3 seasons. By the time his contract is out, he's going to be 34 years old. As we know, it's not impossible, but the receiver position typically ages a little. It can be shaky down the past 30-year-old season, and it's going to be interesting to see how he's able to hold up. And if you look at the second half of this year, it was actually Khalil Shakir and some of the other guys that were stepping up more. I thought that the Bills' offense looked better when Josh Allen was not trying to force feed Stephon Diggs, and he was looking to spread the ball around more. And it was very clear a lot of the time they were trying to get him involved because, yes, they do need him, especially when they're paying him as much money. And he has that talent that you want to make sure that he's involved. He's invested mentally as well. And it just didn't really play out great for him down the stretch of the season. Through the last 10 games, he had 422 yards on 80 targets. Now, his counterpart, Khalil Shakir, he had just 37 targets, but he put up 462 yards. So, more yards on less than half of the targets. And I think that it's a little concerning if you look at this, given that your quarterback is going to be paid all of this money, and you need to make sure that the guys you are paying are effective. Now, I don't mean to just single out Stephon Diggs here, because this is a whole front office thing, and these are the types of conversations that they're going to have to be having internally going into this offseason. Now, another example of this is a couple seasons ago, they paid Von Miller a five-digit contract with over $10 million per season. I believe it was 14, 15, and at the time it made a lot of sense in theory. Von Miller was coming off of a very effective season with the LA Rams. He went and won a Super Bowl there, and this Bills team felt like they were right on the precipice of being, they've been Super Bowl contenders, but they thought that this was a move that could help push them over the edge, and he has largely been ineffective. That being said, in his 30s, he was drafted over a decade ago, and he had a torn ACL, I think it was. He had a season-ending injury early in his Bills career, really struggled to work back from it, and you know what? He got his contract. That's great. I think that he is an all-time player, but that's also the risk you take when you pay such an old player that much money. Now, at the time, it seemed like it was team-friendly too. They have an out, I think, coming into this offseason where they can let him loose and not be hit too much with dead cap or anything like that. We'll see how they choose to maneuver that situation. But just another example of what's been going on with the Bills front office, what they have to do moving forward to try and recalibrate themselves with this spike in Josh Allen's contract due. Now, quickly before the break, I know that a lot of people have sort of unsure about Sean McDermott. I'm somewhat in that camp. I just don't think that it's all his fault. I think that he probably doesn't get enough credit. Yes, this year didn't start out well, but they were practically playing playoff games through the whole second half of the year after starting 6-6. And in 7 seasons as the Bills head coach, he's only had 1 losing season. He has 5 straight 10-win seasons. And you can look at the fake punt, but ultimately that wasn't even why they lost the game on Sunday. So I do think that, yes, there's a lot of talent available coaching-wise in the open market this offseason, but I do think that he's established a culture there. The team chemistry, it seems like his guys like playing for him, so I expect him to be back for them next year, and I don't think it should be all too controversial. So that is it for the Bills. We're going to leave it there with them until we get into some of these more off-season conversations in the future. For now, we're going to be moving on to the championship weekend ahead of us. And when we come back from the break, I'm going to be giving you my top 5 people in the NFL right now that would benefit most from a Super Bowl win this season. So be sure to stick around. Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Once again, we are talking some NFL here. We just moved on from the Bills' loss to the Chiefs and what they have going forward to look at in the offseason. Just a reminder to use the link across the ticker, that is streamelements.com/GSMCsportsnetwork./tip, to help get any of your questions the top priority they deserve and to make sure that this show is interactive. So moving on to our second segment here, we are going to be talking about the top 5 people that have the most to gain from a Super Bowl win this season. So we're going to be starting it off here at number 5 with Brock Purdy, quarterback for the 49ers. And I think that he is a very interesting conversation because despite leading his team to back-to-back NFC championships after being the last pick in the draft last season, Mr. Irrelevant, he has more than exceeded expectations. He has overtaken some pretty significant quarterbacks ahead of him as well. You really think in the 2021 draft, the 49ers trade up to draft Trey Lance with the 3rd overall pick. This is at the same time where they have Jimmy Garoppolo, who just a couple years before that, they gave a massive contract to after trading for him from the Patriots, giving up assets in both of these cases. And it was the last overall pick in the draft that stole the show and gave them, at least in their eyes, the best chance to win. And I do think that that's the case. I think that Jimmy Garoppolo, I think that it's kind of a shame to see the way that his career has played out here. I think that he's probably a better quarterback than he gets credit for, but definitely been struggling with turnovers. And I think that the big thing for his career development, he struggled with staying healthy. And I think that that plays a very large part into you're playing for this 49ers organization where the expectations are high. It is NFC championships every season. And if you can't consistently be on the field for them, they're going to move on without you. And that's exactly what they did. Trey Lance, he had his one start with the 49ers. He might have started at the end in that disappointing season in 2021. I'm not totally sure. He came into 2022 with the starting job. He starts week 1 against the Bears in that monsoon. He looks fine. Obviously very hard to judge off of just that. But then he has a season-ending injury, and in comes Brock Purdy, and he's been really good for them. But even despite all of these obstacles that he's overcome to put his team in this winning position, he has a lot of doubters. And I think that it's somewhat fair because you look at the performance from this past weekend. He was good, but he wasn't great, and this was a very young Packers team that probably outplayed him and his team. Of course, it's a team sport here, but it got outplayed for the majority of the game. They do end up coming away thanks to a Brock Purdy game-winning drive, but I think that you're lying to yourself if you say, if you had questions with Purdy going into the game. I don't think that performance fully proves you, it doesn't help you move on from any concerns like that. So he's currently on a $985,000 contract. I know that's a lot of money, but in NFL terms, that is not. So he is under contract through next season. He's playing for money and he's playing for respect, and he gets both of those if they end up winning the Super Bowl this season. For number 4, I have Lions head coach Dan Campbell. Now, there were a lot of people that, let's not forget, were critical of Dan Campbell when he came onto the scene, when he was talking about biting kneecaps in his first press conference with the team. He was a little unorthodox. He was a lot of personality, for sure, but that personality has helped build the culture to get the Lions to where they are now. He's been a little psychotic with some of the fourth down attempts, the fake punts, the 2-point conversion, like in the primetime game against the Cowboys towards the end of the season. And now he has his team in the NFC Championship. He's done great things, and I think that if the Lions are able to win a Super Bowl this year, he's getting himself a borderline lifelong contract with the Detroit Lions. So he has a lot to gain from a Super Bowl this year. My number 3 is also in Detroit. It is quarterback Jared Goff. Jared Goff was seen as a little bit of a throwaway in the trade a few seasons ago when the Rams traded him and draft capital to acquire Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford comes into McVay's system with the Rams, and immediately they win a Super Bowl. Now, in this time, the Lions had won just 6 games. They started 1-6 for the season, and it didn't look great for them, but he's really turned this around. He has, along with Dan Campbell, who has been a great mentor for him mentally, because you have to imagine in Jared Goff's position, it's very hard to sort of come to terms with. There was a report that McVay wanted a quarterback who he didn't have to hold his hand through everything. Like, that's a little bit tough to come to terms with. This is Jared Goff, the first overall pick in the 2016 draft that the Rams gave up draft capital for to go up and get him. And then they gave him all that money, and immediately that was when Jeff Fisher was part of the coaching staff. McVay comes in, and he just never really clicked with Jared Goff. That wasn't what he was looking for. Jared Goff has come in and vastly exceeded expectations. He's in an environment now where he is the guy, and the team has his back, and I think that he's really put himself in an incredible position. He's made $20 million over the past 2 seasons. He was once seen to be a bridge quarterback. He was an overpaid contract that they couldn't even really get off the books. So it's like, well, let's just roll the dice with him and sort of start to build this thing up. But he's been even better. He looks like he could very well be the guy at the helm for the Detroit Lions for years to come. My number 2 on the list is Kyle Shanahan, head coach of the 49ers. He has had quite the bit of success, even in the postseason. I know that people don't really want to acknowledge that a lot of the time, but he's had quite a bit of success through the past decade or so. He has 4 NFC Championship appearances in the last 5 seasons. But there's still this narrative that he is a choker in the postseason. He was the offensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons when they blew the 28-3 lead against the Patriots in 2017. In the 2020 Super Bowl, when he was with the 49ers going up against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, they were up 20-10 early in that fourth quarter, and they allowed 21 straight points, got nothing done on offense from that point on. And before the comeback win on Saturday, he was 0-30 as a head coach when his team was trailing by at least 7 points entering the fourth quarter. It's now 1-30, but 1-30 is better than 0-30. And it seems as if they now have faith in this system. Now, there was a pretty interesting report that came out from SportsCenter within the past couple days that Shanahan was trying to convince Tom Brady to come out of retirement and be the quarterback for the 49ers this year. Now, this is ESPN, this is SportsCenter, so I don't have the exact writer's name off the top of my head, I'm sorry, but this is a fairly credible source here, and it's interesting, this sort of also plays into what Brock Purdy has to gain. Can he get his big contract when the time comes? But I think that Shanahan here has a lot to gain to sort of break the allegations that he can't get it done in the postseason. And I think that they have their best chance up to this point, because whether you think Brock Purdy is exceptionally better than Jimmy Garoppolo was leading them in that 2020 playoff run, and I think in the NFC Championship game, Garoppolo threw only like 11 passes or so against the Packers. So whether you think Purdy is significantly better than Garoppolo or not, he's on an incredibly cheaper contract, which is significant because it's helped them acquire so much talent on both sides of the ball. I think that they have the best skill position players in the league. You have home field advantage against the Detroit Lions, and I like the Lions a lot. I think the Lions have a good amount of value. They're currently 6.5-point underdogs to play the 49ers this upcoming weekend. We'll get more into the exact specifics of that matchup as the week goes on, but I do think that this is a Lions team that there's a lot of emotion going on, obviously, in that locker room, and I have no doubts that Dan Campbell can motivate that group to not get caught up in the moment, but we're talking about the first conference championship appearance for Detroit since 1991. This is a franchise that hasn't accomplished very much through the course of its existence, and now that they're in this big moment, it would be very possible for them to fold here. Shanahan has a golden opportunity to make that happen and give himself a chance at redemption from all of these so close moments that he's had over the course of the past few seasons. And my number one person with the most to gain from a Super Bowl win is Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson has been incredible. I've been a huge fan of his. I definitely am not saying I was with him from day one. I was questioning whether or not he could throw. There was all the running back allegations that were sort of surrounding him. And he's proven the doubters wrong. And a lot of people have been clinging to that lack of postseason success early in his career, but he is a very much matured player from that point. And here he is, soon to be two-time MVP. And typically how the toxic discourse goes with sports fans is, well, once you start winning those regular season awards and you don't win it all in the postseason, you're just a fraud. That's sort of the way that this plays out with a lot of players. We see it in the NBA all the time, where we see it with one of the guys that had a historic night last night that we'll be getting to in the next segment. But Lamar Jackson has a chance this postseason to join a short list of players that have won multiple MVPs and a Super Bowl ring. That includes Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Montana, Brett Favre, Steve Young, Kurt Warner, and Johnny Unitas. Jim Brown did so before the Super Bowl era, so he had an NFL championship. But, as far as however you want to count it, it's 9 players if you don't count Jim Brown, 10 if you do. Those are all Hall of Fame players. And Lamar Jackson has a chance to, I think it's almost, even without a Super Bowl ring, he has a very good chance to make the Hall of Fame. But we're talking a different level here. it's been Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen for a handful of these years. Joe Burrow entered his name in the conversation, but if Lamar Jackson gets it completely done this season, I think it's hard to keep him out of the top 2 quarterbacks in the league. I don't know if he can surpass Patrick Mahomes. I just think that Mahomes is on a different level than anybody else. But Lamar Jackson has a real chance to change his reputation forever. They have the talent to do so. They're probably my pick for the Super Bowl at this moment, but we'll see how it goes from here. So that is my top 5 people with the most to gain from a Super Bowl win this season. On the other end, we are going to be talking about a crazy night in the NBA, which will lead us into some breaking news from this morning. So be sure to stick with us.
Content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
We are back here on the GSMC Sports Podcast. I am your host, TJ Mabarty. We just wrapped up the top 5 people with the most to gain from a Super Bowl win this season. We talked about Lamar Jackson being number 1 on my list, who is going to have a little bit of a similar resume here to one of the amazing performances that I have ever seen in the NBA. That is Joel Embiid scoring 70 points, the reigning MVP. He does it again, has another massive moment against the San Antonio Spurs. Just incredible stuff from him. So we're going to be getting into his game. And then additionally, as this all was going on, we had another massive scoring outburst from Karl Anthony-Towns. That one in a loss, so we'll sort of get into how that fully looks now the next day, given some very interesting post-game comments from their head coach and such. So we will get into all of that, starting with Joel Embiid here. I went into this game, it's funny, I was looking for the Victor Wembanyama versus Joel Embiid matchup, and that was what I was most interested in, and I thought that for the first bit of that game, I'm watching and I'm like, okay, Wembanyama is really holding his own at times. I think that, still blanket statement, I think that if there is anybody in the league that has the body and the ability to guard Joel Embiid on those mid-range shots where he's so effective from, just based off of his length, he doesn't have to get as much in the body of Embiid, and he can, in theory, stay away from those fouls that Embiid is so good at drawing. But instead, we have Embiid, just as this game is going on, ramping up more and more. And as it's going on, again, because my initial focus on that game from the tip was, how is Wembanyama going to hold up on Embiid? Embiid scores 11 points through the first 5.5 minutes. Wemby picks up his second foul, so he goes to the bench. Then we start to see Embiid really ramping up his aggression, because initially he was just sort of hanging out more so in that mid-range. He wasn't really trying to test Wemby in the paint. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. Does he have this ability to maybe be... There's not going to ever be probably an Embiid stopper other than Al Horford. But in reality, there's nobody that can lock down Joel Embiid. He is proving himself to be one of the greatest scorers in NBA history, really. And then Wemby goes to the bench. Embiid scores 13 more points in the next 6.5 minutes of the first quarter. Like, all right, he's got 24 already in the first quarter. And it just kept building from there. Come the third quarter, he starts actually going into the post and trying to work Wemby himself. Spurs, I mean, again, what can you really do against him? Very hesitant to send extra defenders at him. Especially interesting coming off of Popovich before the game. and he's been pretty sarcastic, I feel like, with the media recently. So I didn't see the clip of him saying itself, which is why a lot of the time when you aggregate these things with those revolutionary, in some ways, at least for social media purposes, the quote images, he said we're going to drill him tonight. He used a little bit more profane language in that, but this is a family-friendly show, of course, and it was clearly not the case. 70 points for Embiid. He was 24 for 41, 21 for 23 from the free throw line. He was dominant, and I think that he also, on that note, added 18 rebounds, 5 assists. I think that 5 assists isn't a ridiculous number, but one of my main criticisms with Embiid for the longest time was, well, once you send the double teams at him, he really struggles with turning the ball over. And that was true for a while, but he's gotten a lot better at that. And he's so hard to work around, really, when you're on the defense. And, the Spurs just couldn't figure it out. The Sixers, in large part, did need a lot of these Embiid points. So you can try and make the argument stat chasing. I think that he definitely stayed in the game and was... but to be fair, at that point, when you're as hot as Embiid was, why wouldn't you keep going to him? It was like a 15-point game with around 3-4 minutes left, but they kept feeding him the ball and it kept working. So can't really fault them for that. Can't really fault Embiid for taking the looks as they were coming to him. And 70 is a wild number. I believe now he adds to a list of 9 players who have done it in NBA history. It's 9 or 10. Don't fully quote me on that. But it was obviously very impressive. And I think that sort of an interesting conversation that follows from a performance like this is the 65 game minimum that it takes to make all NBA teams, to be the MVP in all these season awards. It's interesting whether or not Embiid is actually going to hit that benchmark. He's missed a fair amount of games this season, and going into the year, I agreed with the rule, and I think that they shouldn't fully abandon it after this season, because if it continues the way that it has been trending with Embiid and the way that the Sixers are so much better with him playing than when he rests, there are going to be a lot of people that are going to be really mad if he isn't eligible to win MVP, which I think is fair. I think that it is important for your best players to be on the court day in, day out. I think that the general principle of you have to play to be MVP, All-NBA makes sense, but the benchmarks themselves may have to get tweaked. We'll see how this season plays out. We're just about at the halfway mark, so there is still a lot of time to see how this shakes out, of course. But Embiid has scored over 30 points in over 20 straight games. It's 21, 22 up to this point, adding that performance. Unbelievable stuff. And I think that, again, it adds that conversation. It adds to the conversation of, okay, well, let's see this happen in the postseason, which, again, I believe is a fair concern of sorts. But we're seeing this new version of him. I think that he's adding on even more to his phenomenal MVP campaign from last season. And again, one last time, we'll move on. I'm not trying to be critical of him at all, but last season he has the comments to the media where I'm not sure why people give me so much attention and criticism. I've never even won an MVP award, so how can you get mad at me for not winning in the playoffs? It's not obviously directly what he said. I'm paraphrasing here, but it was along those lines. Sort of seemed like a subliminal shot at Jokic, and Embiid goes on to win the MVP, and Jokic goes on to win the NBA Finals. So now let's say Embiid wins this second MVP. I'm just saying, in the last segment I just talked about, it is a toxic trait that a lot of sports media has, the building players up just to tear them down. I'm not trying to be a part of that. I'm just saying it is a fact that it's a part of the discourse. He even acknowledged it last season of sorts with that quote about not having any MVPs. And if he was to win a second MVP this year, I mean, all of this can change if he has even one playoff run, but has not even reached the Eastern Conference Finals yet. I'm just throwing all of it out there, not to set him up for any slander, but because we should, as NBA fans, be appreciating moments like this. But we can also acknowledge that the way that he plays, it's a lot of drawing fouls. He averages over 12 free throw attempts per game. They're playing the Spurs last night, which is a very young, undisciplined team. A perfect team for him specifically to go off against and draw all these fouls. But he's not going to get all those calls in the playoffs likely. So we will see how this progresses for Philly. Before we go to break here, I do want to touch on Karl Anthony-Towns scoring 62 points, literally an hour within Embiid finishing with 70. Another huge scoring output from one of the premier big men in the league. He scored 44 points, I believe it was, in the first half alone. We're like, oh my God, what is happening in the NBA right now? But it really gets interesting when you look at how this game played out, because they actually go on to lose to the Charlotte Hornets, who going into that game had just 9 wins on the season. You know, they did just get LaMelo Ball back about a week or so ago. So, you know, they're trying to tool up, but sort of little preview to the next segment, they're looking to sell guys off. They just traded one of their best players in a deal to Miami. So they're looking to continue to sell off, and this is the team that they just lost to. They're now 10-31, the Hornets are, and they scored 128 points. This is the number 1 defense in the league in the Minnesota Timberwolves, hoping to be true contenders in the Western Conference. And you drop that game, especially with a scoring performance like Towns just put out, 21 of 35 from the field, 10 of 15 from 3, then added 10 of 14 from the free throw line as well. So, massive game for Cat, but a couple things to come away with for the Timberwolves here. And Chris Finch, their head coach, talked about how they deserved to lose. It was a disrespect to the game of basketball, the way that they had a lack of attention on defense. It was bad. And also, quick side note, Brandon Miller, very much going under the radar for how much he's improving over the course of the year. The second overall pick from this last draft class. Wemby gets a ton of love. Scoot Henderson for the Trailblazers. He hasn't been having a great year. I still have faith in him, but a lot of people thought that he should go number 2. Brandon Miller is doing his thing, and I just wanted to take a quick moment to recognize that. But just to wrap up on the Timberwolves here, this is really their coming out year. They made the playoffs last year. I honestly think that they played the Nuggets in that first round matchup just about as hard as anybody else did through the playoffs. Lakers obviously were very good as well, but the Timberwolves even stole a game from the Nuggets, not easily, went to overtime, but they have sort of been, you know, building themselves up as this potential contender, and there's a lot of immaturity. Karl Anthony-Towns, he was just sort of hunting for points. He seemed disinterested on the other side of the court, and Anthony Edwards, who I love, he didn't have a very good game. There's a little bit of a trend here where they are very reliant on Mike Conley, and I think that Mike Conley is probably one of the more underappreciated guards of the 2010s and so. I think that he's great. He was a huge addition for them last year. He's 36 years old. He's good still, of course, but this is the guy that they are heavily relying on to pay attention, to spread the ball around, to lock in. He's their leader, their floor general, and they need some help at guard. They need a little bit more maturity in the locker room. This is Kat, who was doing a lot of social media rounds talking about how he's changed the game, and what they accomplished was better than what for the play-in tournament was better than what the Nuggets playoff run looked like. I mean, he was saying some ridiculous stuff, and obvious talent there, but there needs to be a little more accountability, a little more maturity, and this team has the talent. They have the defense to really rival just about anybody in the league, but they're not a finished product, and they showed that last night. So we will be picking up on the other side of the break, talking about the breaking news that went down this morning involving none other than the Charlotte Hornets. So stick around for that. We will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Coming into our final segment of the day, we are going to be talking about the trade that was announced this morning. That was the Miami Heat trading for the Charlotte Hornets guard Terry Rozier. I think the details of this trade quickly. It was the Heat sending out Kyle Lowry, who is not the Kyle Lowry that we've seen for a lot of his career. Very much on the latter end of his career. I believe he's up to 37 years old now. So they send him and a lottery-protected 2027 first-round pick from the Heat. If that conveys, then it will be an unprotected pick in 2018. 2028, not 10 years ago. But I really like this trade for the Heat. I really like Terry Rozier. As a Celtics fan here, really did not like seeing this trade go down, because I do think that Terry Rozier has been very much underappreciated, underrated in these years in Charlotte. Now, a little bit of an interesting reaction from some Charlotte fans online talking about they finally have him gone. I don't think that that's fair. I think he's been very good for them. LaMelo Ball has struggled with health. And I know that the Hornets haven't been good these past few seasons, but I think that he's played really valuable minutes for them. And no, you are not obviously winning necessarily with Terry Rozier being your best player, but adding him to the Heat here where he can sort of settle into a role more. He doesn't have to be the true number one, but he's a great crunch time performer in my opinion. Has been since he was in Boston, and I think that this is a really good addition for the Heat, who are looking to add some supplemental scoring and playmaking ability. I don't think that they really had a true point guard this season. They rely, and to their credit, they get the most out of every single player that goes on the court for them. But I think that they were relying a lot on some of these marginal guys, and Terry Rozier adds a lot more stability and reliability. I think that he's a phenomenal scorer. He's averaging something around 26 points per game, like 6.6 assists per game, and he's been, again, I think a very underappreciated player throughout his career. And now you add that, giving up not very much. You actually go down in cap space for this season based off of how much money Kyle Lowry was making at this age, where he wasn't really providing you a whole lot if you're Miami, especially come playoffs. Just not, again, borderline Hall of Fame player in Kyle Lowry, but his best seasons were behind him. Now you bring in Rozier, who has sort of been starving for getting back in the playoffs. In the 2017 Celtics run, where the very young Celtics at the time ended up making a run, going to Game 7 against LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers, Rozier was the point guard. He stepped in and was huge for them, was hitting clutch shots against Eric Bledsoe. just, I really like Terry Rozier's game, and I think that he's not going to have to do too much. If there were any sort of complaints from Charlotte fans during his tenure with Charlotte, it was probably thinking that he was doing a little too much and that he wasn't helping the younger guys truly develop. But that's not necessarily, he's still got a lot of years ahead of him. His number one objective, especially when playing on that team, is not to, let everybody else take the shine away from him and he just sort of goes away to be a mentor. He's still 29 years old. He's just about in the prime of his career. And I think that, again, I keep saying it, I think that this is a really good spot for him to play along with Jimmy Butler, Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo. This is the best point guard that the Heat have had since the All-Star 2020 season from Goran Dragic. So I really like this fit. On the Charlotte side of things here, it's fine. You ultimately offload some cap space going forward. I guess we'll have to see whether or not they can get anything for Kyle Lowry. I think it's going to be tough with the contract that is attached to him. We'll see if he's a buyout market guy, or we'll see if they can get at least anything in return for him to just get a little bit more of a package. But I am sort of the belief that, especially when you're a young Charlotte Hornets team, cap space really isn't a huge deal in the long run, because it's not like you are contenders to go out and sign stars. Now, who knows? Maybe I'll be wrong on this. Maybe they have something else planned. It's sort of similar in a sense to what the Pacers did this past offseason. They had cap space. Did they go out and sign a star? No. What they did, at least, is sign Bruce Brown to a very expensive contract based off of what Bruce Brown was probably projected to get, around $20 million. And they traded that contract to acquire a star to match the contract, get Pascal Siakam. So maybe that's sort of the thought process here for the Hornets, but I don't think that a draft pick from the Miami Heat typically ends up garnering a lot of value. So it's lottery protected in 2027. If it does fall in the lottery, the Heat keep that. So the Hornets can at best get a pick 15 or later draft pick from the Heat in 2027, or they can get an unprotected pick in 2028. So we'll see. I mean, if Miami falls off, then yeah, this could end up looking like a great deal for them. But I don't really expect that to be the case. The Heat never go away. They've been one of the best run organizations of the past decade plus, as long as I have been an NBA fan. So I understand you're not a good team right now, and you are paying this guy a good amount of money for the next couple seasons. Getting off of him and acquiring a first round pick is not a bad return necessarily. I also don't know. I feel like they maybe could have gotten more, and I say that in theory, but not sure what the market for Terry Rozier necessarily was. Now, if you look at like an LA Lakers or something, could they have given D'Angelo Russell and maybe that 2029 pick? Perhaps. How much better is that? I mean, I think that the Lakers 2029 pick is probably more valuable than whatever pick they're going to get from the Miami Heat. So, again, I guess we'll see. I'm not super bullish on it for the Hornets, but you know what? They're trying to blow it up. I don't know if this was necessarily the best year for that to happen. Obviously, there was the Wemby sweepstakes last year. LaMelo missed a lot of time. So if you're going to tank last year, sort of seemed like the opportunity to do so. it was reported that they're still looking to be active come the trade deadline, which I believe is February 8th. So Gordon Hayward's an expiring contract. I think that he's also been pretty good for them. So you can see that. There have been teams reaching out about Miles Bridges, who is having, it's a little tough to root for a guy like that based off of what has gone down in his past, but he's a very good basketball player. He's been a 20-point per game scoring player, solid defense. A couple teams have reached out to the Hornets about acquiring him. So we'll see what they continue to do here. But just to wrap this up, big picture, how does this impact the Heat going forward? I think that, if I haven't made it clear, I'm a Celtics fan here. I do think the Celtics are the best team in the Eastern Conference. I don't think that that's a very hot take. If you want to say I'm biased, I'll accept that. But when I look around the Eastern Conference, I think that there are real concerns with the Milwaukee Bucks defense and sort of that guard spot for them. Malik Beasley's having a good season for them, but still a little vulnerable at the 2 guard, I think. And we'll see what they're up to. Alex Caruso is somebody I have my eyes on. I don't think the Celtics have a chance of getting him. I don't want him to go to any of the other contenders in the Eastern Conference, but Philadelphia, again, fair. It's probably unfair to be realistic, but they're just an example of, I see that logo. I've seen how this has gone down in the past between the Celtics and the Sixers. The Sixers couldn't pull away in Game 6 at home. The Celtics on the ropes last year in Game 6. I think the Celtics have gotten better. Now, I think that the Sixers are also probably better this season. I think that Embiid has gotten better himself. Trading Harden has opened up Tyrese Maxey. But I think it's a real concern, Joel Embiid staying healthy in the playoffs. We're really yet to see a true healthy run. I think that 2019 may have been the last time we've seen him healthy for 2 straight rounds when they lost to the Toronto Raptors in the second round. But it's sort of a year in, year out thing with him where he just can't stay healthy. And it's not fair, really, to fully just bank on an injury like that. I just feel like when I see that, I feel like the Celtics can handle the 76ers. Now, the Miami Heat, another example of a logo, but a very different perception. I'm scared of the Heat. I was already scared of the Heat just based off of how well run that team is. Jaime Jaquez has been having a phenomenal rookie season for them. He's probably a shoo-in for all-rookie first team. Jimmy Butler hasn't been playing a ton, so the Heat are a 6 seed right now, but they're much better than a 6 seed. I'd almost prefer them be a higher seed so the Celtics could avoid them for as long as possible. But I'm scared of the Heat, have been. Adding Terry Rozier to this, he's going to have an extra fire now, finally freed from a bad Charlotte organization and hungry to reestablish himself as a real difference maker in a playoff environment. I think the Heat are the biggest threats to the Celtics in the Eastern Conference. And I don't think that's a crazy statement. Now, the top 4 really in the Eastern Conference are all very good teams. The Celtics, the Heat, the Bucks, the 76ers. The Knicks are a good team. I don't see true contention 3 rounds in a row for them. First round, second round, 4 rounds in a row. I just don't see it with Julius Randle being... Jalen Brunson is a phenomenal player. He's a dog. He's the leader of that team. He's the best player on that team. But Julius Randle is also a very important part of how that team functions. I just don't know if I see him for a month straight being fully locked in on both sides and being consistent. So I think that very top-heavy Eastern Conference, I think the Heat are, and we'll see if they'll make any other moves. We'll continue to monitor the trade market across the NBA. But I think that today was a very important day for the Miami Heat. So that is all I have for today. Thank you very much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Remember to like and follow. It helps us out a lot. And we will be back, just as a reminder, every day, 2 to 3 o'clock, we are live across most streaming platforms. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we will be back